Good evening, everyone. I hope you guys are having a great October so far. Welcome to this webinar we're having tonight. We're so glad that you're joining us. If you don't know me, my name is Stephanie Powers, and you'll probably be getting, if you haven't already, a lot of correspondence from me. I have a couple of things to go over with you really quickly before I turn it over to Landon. First of all, you guys are turning in your work, and that's great, and we're so glad. You guys are doing a phenomenal job this semester, and just keep up the good work. We're all hearing great things about everyone from your teaching assistants and your instructors and such. So I just wanted to encourage you to just keep up the good work. There are a couple of things whenever you're taking your quizzes. You might see an option that says save without submitting. And really what that's for is if you're taking an exam and your electricity would go out, or if you needed to take a phone call or something like that. It's really not designed for saving and then starting again in a couple of hours or next week. And so I just wanted to clear up some confusion on that, that's just a safety mechanism, so you don't have to go back and redo your work should something happen like that. It's just for a safety protocol, so it's not designed for saving and a couple of days later coming back. Also, please check your syllabus and your classes and know who your teaching assistants are, and make sure if you have issues with those classes or questions or concerns that you contact the correct teaching assistant. They're going to be the best people to help you with any issues that you might have or questions. And so make sure you know who those people are. And if you can't find those, please send me an email and I can help you out with that. Lastly, I will be taking roll tonight, so make sure you check in the comment section. If you cannot, for some reason, access the live chat, please email me at stephanie@destinyleadershipinstitute.com, and I'll be able to see that you attended. Also, if you have questions during the webinar tonight, I ask that you will just chat those in your chat box, and I will be submitting those to Landon throughout the webinar, and he will field those to himself or Pastor Randy. So without further ado, I just want to turn it over to Landon and allow him to introduce our guest for the evening. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and be blessed.
Hello, class. Thank you for that, Stephanie, introduction and announcements. Glad that you're with us. I want to echo what Stephanie said. You guys are doing a fantastic job at this point. I feel like the discussion forums are going so well. You're engaging with your work. You're learning a lot. And thank you for your continued hard work and your commitment. Tonight, I'm very excited to be here with Pastor Rande Greene of Dayton, Ohio. Pastor Rande is actually my cousin. Call him uncle because him and my mom grew up so close. So he's my cousin uncle, uncle cousin, something like that. So he's my cousin, but we grew up, our families are close together, and he just does a phenomenal job. And he asked me to come speak this weekend here in Dayton. And so I said, I'd love to do that, but I'd love to have you take a moment and share with our students. Pastor Rande is one of the most intellectual men that I know, very smart guy, and a great leader with a great church here in Dayton. And I believe he has a lot that he can share with us. And so I asked him to address the topic on how to be a lifelong learner. That learning is not something that leaders do as a means to an end. Learning is not something that leaders do just to prepare better sermons or to be more efficient at ministry, but leaders really learn to stay connected to God and for their own benefit and to have an active life of the mind. And so he's going to do an excellent job speaking about that. Pastor Rande, just feel free to maybe introduce yourself a little bit better than I have, okay, and then dive into the content, and right, we'll be here. Students also, be sure to ask any questions that you want. Stephanie will get those to us. We plan the last 15 or 20 minutes for questions. So I'd love to have some feedback from you.
Thank you, Landon. I don't mean to make this like a mutual admiration society, but Landon did an incredible job ministering in both services Sunday here at Faith Christian Fellowship in Beaver Creek. And I appreciate him being here, and I've always admired Landon, and especially now with his academic pursuits, and his ministry was just relevant, meaningful, and really spoke to my heart personally, and I know it did to the congregation. I've heard several comments from people already that were challenged and were inspired by your ministry. And so thank you. We appreciate you being here, and we'll have you back really soon. I guess I'm called upon to address the idea of being a lifelong learner because I've been on this earth 58 years now and have been pastoring since I was 24 years old, 2 different locations. And so being a lifelong learner, I believe is incredibly important. We really can't become stymied by time or discouragement or the load of responsibilities. We have to include in our responsibilities the challenge of expanding our thinking, expanding our vision because of learning, listening to other voices, learning from other people, and being a lifelong learner, in my opinion, is so important to being a pastor and living the life of a pastor, but as also a Christian pastor. One of the fundamentals, I think, in being a lifelong learner is a measure of humility. Humility, of course, is just a proper, right, and accurate assessment of ourselves. It's really seeing ourselves the way we should see ourselves. And when we see ourselves accurately, we're able to be in a quest for those things that will improve us as Christians, as husbands, as fathers, as pastors, seeing ourselves the right way. I believe that seeing ourselves, properly assessing ourselves, and not thinking too highly of ourselves, but not thinking too lowly of ourselves. Someone said the Lord didn't call us to think less of ourselves, but to think of ourselves less. And so that is the proper, I'd give attribution, but I can't remember who said it, who I heard it from. But when we think of ourselves accurately, we are able to pursue things in a more earnest and passionate manner, having the right view of ourselves and seeing ourselves accurately. If we think too highly of ourselves, I think we'll probably think we don't need that much growth. We don't need that much change. We don't sense it's not a desperate thing for us to improve because we think we've already arrived. Thinking too lowly of ourselves, I think we probably may conclude that we can't grow and learn if we think too lowly of ourselves. So having a proper estimation of ourselves, I think, is a good foundation. Humility, which coupled with desire, a passion to learn, to grow with application, and that results in personal growth, I think. So humility. And I think that one of the things as a pastor that I really should have deeply embedded in my heart is a desire to please the Lord. And I think the desire to please the Lord will push me, will give me a greater quest to learn, to grow, to expand my mind, to increase my level of understanding. I was telling Landon earlier, and we had since Landon's been here, he arrived last Saturday evening, we've had some just incredible fellowship. It's been enriching for me. But we were discussing some of this, and I told him that I have a fear, a real fear of not pleasing the Lord. And sometimes it's almost a terror, and somebody could correct me and tell me that I shouldn't feel terror, but the idea of not pleasing the Lord, not hearing, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant," someday really is something that I think would be a horrible tragedy, and I want to please the Lord. I think that's one of the things that would drive a person to learn, to be a student, to be a lifelong learner, the desire to please the Lord. And Landon and I, talking about this earlier, I think that we really cannot grow as pastors unless we have a desire to please God.
Yeah.
And that desire drives us on. My goal, my purpose, my aim as a gospel minister is to lead God's people to sanctification. Skevington Wood, an author that I've been reading recently, said, the work of sanctification is the work of a man's life. I think that includes the entirety of his life. If I'm going to lead people, lead the flock in sanctification, I have to be growing in sanctification myself. It should be my quest. I should be looking at myself in my office. My wife bought me, she put a plaque in my office that is Acts 20 and 28. And the first part of it just really, I look at it, it says, take heed unto thyself and to the flock. And Paul is talking to the Ephesian elders, and he's just told them that he is going to, he's seeing them for the last time. It's one of the most touching and tender parts of the New Testament. It touches me every time I read it. And they fall on one another and they weep and they're moved with emotion. And he says, take heed to yourselves and to the flock. First of all, take heed to yourself. You can't take care of the flock if you're not taking care of yourself. And we get so wrapped up in our responsibilities, especially someone like Landon who has a small child and one on the way, and folks that have small children or children at home. Mine are grown, and my wife and I are empty nesters at this point. But especially, if you have children at home and the responsibilities of that, then coupled with the responsibilities of being a good husband, a godly husband, then a pastor, and we can get caught up in the responsibilities and not take heed unto ourselves.
That's good. And I think as it relates to our DLI students, so the first thing you mentioned is humility,
Mm-hmm.
and that's having an honest appraisal of yourself and your value. And so coming into a program like DLI, there might be a temptation to say, well, do I need this, or I already know all this, or what can that teach me? And that comes from a prideful disposition. And then there's also probably the more popular or more prevalent, I should say, attitude is that, well, this just isn't for me. I'm not a book person. I'm not a smart person. I'm not capable. But to be a lifelong learner, you have to say, okay, I am capable. I am smart. I just need the desire.
Right.
But also be humble enough there. And then that attitude carries you on to being a lifelong learner. And I'll talk with Pastor Rande in a moment about some of the systems he uses for reading and Bible study and memorization to show that after your 2 years are done with DLI, that I hope all we've done is whet your appetite to continue reading, to keep pursuing the things that God has for you. And then the final point, or the last point he's made, is not the final point yet, but the last point, I think how it really applies to us is that, if we don't take care of ourselves first, then how can we care for those who God has placed under our care? So often, leaders only learn as a means to an end.
Right.
Leaders only learn because it's going to make them better, make their church bigger, make them a more entertaining and engaging speaker. Right. And whenever learning and development is solely used for pragmatic purposes, we deprive ourselves, and we're not following the wisdom of the apostle to take care of ourselves first.
Right.
That so much of the learning, so much of the training and the education that many people pursue is solely pragmatic, and pragmatism will not save your soul.
Right. No.
Pragmatism actually takes you away from the gospel.
Absolutely. I read an article here last week, and I was thinking, I brought it up here. 70%, this is from Focus on the Family and Fuller Seminary. They did a study, and 70% of the pastors polled said the only time they spend studying the Word is when they're preparing for their sermons.
Wow.
70% of the 1,500 pastors polled said they only spend time studying the Word when they're preparing for sermons. And I think that's possibly a recipe for spiritual collapse or imploding. If we're not really being fed, how can we feed?
Right.
And so we need, as ministers, Christian ministers and pastors, to be fed, to grow, to learn, to be inspired. Or preaching can become perfunctory and ritualistic. It can become like performance art,
Right.
And be satisfied enough if you get the right response, or the people slap you on the back and are basically being entertained. But if we approach the ministry with our hearts full, inspired, walking with God, hearing from God, filled up, I think we're so much the better for it. And we can't do that. We cannot approach the desk, the sacred desk, if the only time we're with God is to hear something so we can share that.
Right.
We have to prepare our hearts before we prepare sermons. We have to prepare our hearts before we prepare sermons. And I think that's key.
Right. And along those same lines, we've talked about this before, is that, and we'll get into some of your study habits in a moment, but that studying really does not just include the time to put a sermon together or a teaching together or a lesson together. Rather, studying is the whole process of preparing yourself.
Right.
So you may be reading on a completely different topic than what you're going to be teaching on or preaching on. But yet, through that process, you are engaging your mind, you're engaging your spirit in a way that you'll be a more effective communicator, even if the content is far removed from what you're studying.
I have found, related to that, I have found that when I read above my head, when I read authors that are, scholarly and are brilliant, men like N.T. Wright and people like that, it stimulates me. I think I become a little bit better thinker. It's like it's greasing the wheels up here or something, and I find myself thinking above what I normally would when I read people that are, I'm reading above my head. I don't know how else to say it than that.
Right.
So I'm not afraid to pick up, N.T. Wright's The Resurrection of the Son of God, which is almost 900 pages, and tear into it, or other IVP authors, higher, if you will. And I'm not afraid to do that, even though I may have to read something 2 or 3 or 4 times.
Right.
I may have to read a chapter twice and still feel like I'm not getting all of it. But I think it stimulates it. It stimulates my thinking to where I believe I'm expanding what God has given me and becoming a little bit better than I have been because of that reading. So I think that's one thing that applies there as far as reading above my head.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why I read a variety of authors. I guess we're getting to the practical aspect of it now, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. I read a variety of authors, some inspirational, some more deeply theological. Sometimes I just read commentaries. A good commentary. I think that's a good idea. Lately I've been trying to read biographies. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, I've read 3 biographies, and not just good men, great men. I must admit I read a biography of the life of Jimi Hendrix, which he was a spectacular figure. But just reading the lives of great men and learning from them, and learning from their good points, their bad points, their mistakes, their strengths, and I feel like I could make myself a better person by learning from great men and reading about their lives. And that's just one aspect of reading. But reading a variety, a man who, I heard someone say, a man who won't read is no better than a man who can't read.
That's good.
And so I think it's incumbent upon a pastor to be a well-read man. And obviously some pastors don't have as much time as others, but to spend as much time as we can, read a little bit every day, and spend time. Personally, for me, I find that I'm better if I read in the morning. My mind's a little bit better, a little bit quicker. I comprehend things better than, especially in the afternoon, I read and I get sleepy. Or, sometimes in the evening, my mind is tired, and especially if it's been a taxing day. But reading in the morning seems to work for me, and reading a variety of books. And we talked about that earlier, obviously.
Yeah, and I think one thing that he's alluding to is that we should always be in our reading, maybe pushing ourselves a little bit beyond what we think that we can read or comprehend. Ministry is primarily it's solely a theological vocation. So the minister who has no use for theology or biblical studies is a false dichotomy that should not exist.
There's a theological reason for everything we do.
Exactly, yes.
I mean, there's a theological reason for praying. There's a theological reason for preaching. There's a theological reason for counseling. There's a theological reason for everything we do. And if we don't study theology, we're not reading the reason for what we're doing.
Absolutely. And throughout church history, the great leaders have been some of the most well-read men in society.
Absolutely.
From the church fathers to the reformers, on down to our present time, that leaders that make a difference are well-read, well-rounded in their education. And so what we want to show you is a model of someone. Uncle Randy went to Bible college years ago, but has never pursued formal graduate studies. However, through his own desire to please God, through his own desire for discipleship, through his own desire for sanctification, has become definitely one of the most well-read men that I personally know. I don't know how he does it all. I mean, he tells me all the books he's read, and it makes me feel like that I'm a slacker, and I'm in a doctoral program. But it's just this desire. And so what I want you to see it modeled as a form of ministry is not just the performance aspect of, hey, let's have good church, but someone who says, okay, but I'm going to lead people that I need to know God. And if I'm going to know God, the only way to know God is to dig deep, to think deeply, to go beyond the surface, to not just read the bestsellers that everyone else is reading, but to really dig in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, we have to be somewhat discerning about what we read too. You can spend your time reading about blood moons and stuff like that, which really, my thinking is not, I don't mean to insult anybody, but I think we need to be discerning in what we read. And the theological aspects of ministry, if we're not a student of the Bible, we're not a student of God. And I know I have a young minister here in the church I pastor who said a while back that really all he needs to read is the Bible. And I think that is a terrible, terrible mistake. And I think it can lead to all kinds of, it leaves historical theology out of the question. It leaves the development of theology out of the question. And it allows you to go places on your own. Your interpretation is your own, and you can become a heretic if we're not gauged by what others are saying, and we can read things that we don't agree with. I started a book a while back, reading a guy whose view of election is totally different than my own. And I admit it was so painful reading this book that I disagreed with many things that were said. But I think it's probably a good idea to do that, to read a variety of authors and subjects and even people that you disagree with theologically. I think that could be key in our growth, and if nothing else, to help develop the right answer for what you think is wrong and erroneous or heretical. So having a variety of reading, I think, is a tremendous thing that we as pastors, to be a well-read man, as you said, Landon, to be a well-read man. But I personally, I go through periods of time where I'm just really soaking it in, enjoying reading, and then I'll go through periods of time where it's work.
Right.
It's work. And then there are some books that I've started that it just was not working. It wasn't engaging me. It wasn't stimulating me. So I've even, after like 3 or 4 chapters, set it aside, and then later on pick it up, and it really hit.
Right.
It really helped me. That's something that's happened in my life. And then there are some books that I put aside and never pick up again because it didn't seem relevant. It really wasn't engaging me. So, being willing to read the right things, being willing to finish what we read, that's been a thing too. I can start reading something and not finish it. So somewhere along the line, I have to just make myself finish it. And so, that's not being, in a classroom setting. You have the choice to read this, that, or something else, and you can make the choice yourself. You just have to exercise discipline, finish what you start.
Well, we have a couple of questions coming in, so we'll get those in just a second. But so sticking with some of the practical, so we read widely, deeply. Most of you in DLI, your reading is selected for you. You probably don't have a lot of time to read on top of what we've assigned. So the next couple of years, you're good. We've went through what we think are good books, foundational books, things that can help you grow and develop. Also, every syllabus and each course, so each syllabus has recommended reading list as well. And so those are great. If you find a class very interesting, you can go to that recommended reading list and find some other books that are helpful. But then in the future, you're already on a schedule of study. You've already got some kind of pattern worked out, hopefully, of when you do your DLI work, if that's early in the morning or weekends or whenever it is. For many of you, it's from the hours of 10 to 12 o'clock on the last Sunday night that things are due. is your general routine, whatever it might be. Don't let that stop with DLI. Pick up books and continue on your studying and that way. So that's read good books. Read lots of books, but particularly find good books to read. And one great way to do that is just if you go to a local church, which all of you should be, there are learned people in your congregation. There are people that are reading good books. Find someone you trust and say, hey, what are you reading? So every time that I see Uncle Randy, that's the first question I ask him. Hey, what are you reading? And he asks me the same thing because he might have read something that I haven't read yet.
Right.
And I find I'm going to pick that up because I know that if he's reading it, it's something that would be worthwhile. So that's reading. Then we move on to the issue of studying the Bible.
Right.
And you've got a system for that. And I think how I want to just introduce that idea is when it comes to Bible study, reading the Bible, is that that leaders, we have to be very intentional about how we read and study the Bible. That you may do really well on the read the Bible through in a year type program, 3 or 4 chapters in the Old Testament, a New Testament chapter or 2, a Psalm, a proverb. You might do well with that. I don't do well with that at all. So it's finding, okay, how am I going to get the most time out of my Bible study? So talk to us a little bit about maybe what your process of studying the Bible looks like.
There were several years in a row that we encouraged members of our church to read through the Bible together. And we still have in our weekly bulletin a schedule for reading the Bible through, what they would need to read that next week. And that's great. But I've found personally, if I'm going to try to read the Bible through in a year, I'm going to have to read so much. I'm going to have to consume so much during a single day that I don't feel like I'm really getting what I need to get from it. So what I've begun doing is I'll take a year and I'll make a particular book of the Bible my quest for that year. Right now, this year, 2016, I'm going through the book of Psalms. And so every morning, the first thing I do, well, possibly the second thing I do, I will turn my Bible on, and I'll open to that portion of Psalms for that day, and I'll read it, and then I'll pray about it. I'll read some comments from various scholars on that particular portion of the Psalms, and I'll really allow it. I'll take time with it. I'll try to absorb what the psalmist is saying. And I must admit, and this is unique for the Psalms, being that it's a prayer book for believers. The New Testament, the early New Testament Christians, Jesus used the book of Psalms as a prayer book, I believe. And the thing that's unique for the book of Psalms is it's really revolutionized my prayer life and talking to God. And always reading the scripture, studying the scripture, in my opinion, should lead us to prayer. And we should launch into prayer from the scripture, reading of scripture. I feel a little bit deprived in prayer. I don't feel like I've necessarily prayed the right way if I just go to my office in the morning and kneel down to pray. I feel like reading the scriptures in the morning prepares my heart for prayer and launches me into prayer. So the study of the scriptures is so key and fundamental to every Christian, but especially to pastors, because we work and we labor in the word, and we use it. It's our tool. It's our toolbox. And if we're not well acquainted with the word, we're not well acquainted with the tools we have to accomplish our task at hand. So I'll take a year and I'll study a book of the Bible. I remember listening to a seminary course by I can't remember his name now. Landon, I told you earlier his name, but a seminary course by a seminary teacher. And he made the statement that he knew of a man who spent 45 years of his life in study of the book of Ephesians. And when he died, he died feeling like he really hadn't accomplished what he set out to do, that he didn't get an exhaustive look at it. 45 years was not enough to study the book of Ephesians. I think that taking a year, even a small book like Colossians, we could take a year and just really soak ourselves in the knowledge of that book. It is the living, breathing Word of God. And
you can memorize Colossians
you
if you have
could,
a year.
4 chapters.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. And I think that'd be a good idea. So that's kind of the first thing I do. I rise in the morning, as I said, and I'll read, because if I know myself, if I take my phone or my iPad and I take a look at my emails that I've gotten over the night, and
Yes.
and I'll never get that back. I'll never get that opportunity back. I'll end up getting wrapped up in this, trying to put that fire out. So I have to discipline myself. I'll get my coffee, I'll get my Bible, I'll get my journal, and the very first thing, I have to do it. And I like to do it alone. I like to do it early. I like to do it first thing. And I think that's key.
Right.
I really do.
Yeah, and my normal process is the same. I try to wake up as early as I can. With a baby is not always it doesn't always go to plan. But my normal wake up call is right after 5 a.m. And it's right after 5 a.m. though, because if it's 5 a.m., that's just entirely too early. But like 5:05 makes perfect sense.
Right.
So it's right after 5 a.m. And I spend the first 30 to 45 minutes in the Word,
Right.
and then I read the other things because that I need to read as well. Because I'm like you, my brain works
Better.
much better in the morning.
Yeah.
I've also found that I know that I'm very blessed with what I do to have some flexibility in my schedule, so that allows me to take a little more time in the mornings than other people who have to be at work at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock might have. But it's just part of my routine. And it's so important. I'm in Ephesians now. I've been in there for several months. I'm actually memorizing it and studying it as I go. And I find that Bible study is so much more effective whenever it's focused, it's narrow. And we're not saying that's the only way to do it.
Right.
But we are saying that as a leader that you need to think through it, not just do it because you're supposed to do it, not just read the Bible through in a year because that's what your church has always done, or that somehow you're a bad Christian if you don't make it through the Bible this year. If you plan on being a Christian your whole life, then you have your whole life to read the Bible. So there's no need to rush through it by December 31st. But so just find a system of Bible reading as well.
Yeah, Landon is being very gracious in mentioning the different places that students may find themselves, having to be at a job at 7, 8, 9 o'clock and not having the same ability to approach it the way we do first thing in the morning. The first 9 years of my pastoral ministry, I worked a job. In addition, I was bivocational, and then I had small children as well. And I really can sympathize with a person who is an avid student of the Bible and wants to read and immerse themselves in good biblically sound books by authors who are scholars or great authors or whatever. I can really sympathize with somebody that has those time limitations. But if we, and I've told people from our church this, that have said they just don't have time, and it can be a little bit cold-blooded, but we find time for those things that are important to us. Right. And I don't mean to be cruel. No, I don't mean to come across that way, but we find time for things that are very important to us. Some people that I know have said they don't have time are on social media way too much. And I can't get no help when I say that. Yes. But the point is, we find time for those things that really matter to us and really mean a lot to us. And sometimes I think people should shoot the TV because it's one of the greatest thieves of time. And
keeping with that pastoral tone, that if you don't have time to be a learner, a disciple, which disciple just means a learner, one who sits at the feet of the Rabbi Jesus, one who learns from him, who takes his yoke. If you don't have time to be a learner, then you really aren't in a season where you should be leading. And that's it's perhaps a little direct, but it's true. It's true. It is true. Because where are you leading people to? Right. If you're not getting there yourself, then where are you leading them to?
Right. If you're a leader and no one's following, you're just taking a walk.
Right.
So one of the things I wanted to say too, and I realize the time restraints here, is one of the reasons we should be a lifelong learner is because of the challenges we face. We face incredible and enormous challenges, unique challenges. A person who wants to lead others, to minister to others, will face challenges in their lives because we're dealing with the sin nature. We're dealing with our own sin nature. We're dealing with the sin nature in other people. And I know there may be theological differences on all of that, but I was reading the other day Psalm 106, because I'm reading through Psalms.
Right. You made it a long way.
I'm at 106. Israel's failures, they forgot. They forgot the God that brought them out of Egypt. And I think of all the things that we have forgotten. And to be a lifelong learner means also to be reminded of things that you need to be reminded of. And then to remind people of things that they've learned and forgotten. That's the tendency of the sinful nature, is to forget God, to forget things he's done. And then it said in 106, they gave into their craving. We're fighting the instincts of the sin nature in people that we love and we want to lead. The sin nature, our greatest enemy is not the devil or demons. Our greatest enemy is not the world. Our greatest enemy, in my opinion, is our sin nature. And so here we are. It's an uphill battle. If we are not becoming better equipped to minister to people, then we are failing them, in my opinion, and possibly failing God because of the challenges we face, the fallen sinful nature. And then, of course, in 106, it said they put God to the test. And that's a short list of what makes our job difficult in ministering to people. And our main challenge is those tendencies that we see in people we're pastoring, they're in ourselves as well. And so that's why we have to become learners for our entire life and expand and grow and better ourselves through the Word of God and through allowing the Word of God to take us into places in prayer. Praying the Word is key to becoming a better learner. Praying the Word, in my opinion, is key to us.
Right.
And I don't know if you wanted to add anything there.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention also the social aspect of being a lifelong learner, learning from other people. I am 58 years of age. I've been a pastor since I was 24 years old. And I have a pastor. I'm not associated with a denomination. I'm non-denominational and independent, but I have a pastor. I meet with him every month. He's a tremendous man of God. He's 86 years of age, has a storied life with a history that is just rich and wonderful. And he challenges me. As I said, we meet once a month. He is a man that is finishing well, and I want to learn from him so that I can finish well also. And so the challenge of being in relationships and being in community with people, being close to people, being accountable to someone, and allowing those people to speak into your life and to correct you if correction is needed, to inspire you when that's needed, to be able to speak to them in honesty and candor, share our hearts with someone, and then feel the loving response of that particular person. It has to be someone you trust. Then you're able, of course, to learn from other people. And then, of course, we learn from the people we try to lead. Sometimes we learn how to not do things so that we can help others to do the right things. And so I think being in community, not just in the community of a local church, but a community of fellowship of peers. Some of my pastor friends, I just can't describe how much they have meant to me, and friends and young men like Landon, I admire and respect and listen to, and I believe that's part of being a lifelong learner, is listening to people.
You've Mortimer Adler. He wrote a book called How to Read a Book. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not.
I've seen it.
It's a classic. Yeah. It's a tough read. But one thing he says that we have dead teachers and we have live teachers. The dead teachers are the great books, the classics. Yeah. And then we have live teachers, and those are the people that we're with, and each of them function a little bit differently. However, they're both very important. That reading books, you're getting something from someone that you're not physically with, right, but they're teaching you.
Right.
But then you also need the live teachers. I'll be the old codger in the room, but the trend in some ministry circles now are like, the lead pastors are these cool hip guys, and I like to think of myself as a cool hip guy, and I hope I'm always a cool hip guy. Stephanie says, no, I'm not. But
she's shaking her head.
But the idea is like, what I'm getting at though is that though it's okay to be jovial and to have a good time, I believe that life is meant to be enjoyed, that God gave it to us to be enjoyed. You need to find people in your life that you can have those deep deeper,
Yeah, right.
meaningful conversations. Like everything's not a joke. Everything's not superficial. Everything's not about the latest series on Netflix or what so-and-so said on Facebook or how SEC football is going. Like I love all those things except for what so-and-so said on Facebook, but Netflix and football. I love all those things.
Yeah.
However, as leaders, it's our job really to engage in elevated conversations, that everything's not a joke. Everything's not at the pop culture level.
Right.
We need some deeper roots.
We need people that are going to ask us questions we don't want to hear.
Right.
And we need relationship with people that are going to tell us things we don't want to hear. And how many people does the average pastor have in his life that are going to tell him things about him personally that he doesn't want to hear, and are going to do it in love? Now, obviously, you're going to have people in your church, disgruntled people, that are going to tell you things you don't want to hear, but they're not telling you that in love. They're telling you that out of self-interest.
Right.
And it may not be good for you. It could be good for you. It depends on how you receive it and how you apply it. But we need people in our life, people with authority in our lives, people that we're accountable to, that are going to tell us things we need to hear and maybe things we don't necessarily want to hear. And then we can learn by that. The Lord, his word tells us things we don't necessarily want to hear.
Yes.
And so somebody that is going to speak into your life is going to be that same kind of person. Now, not just things you don't want to hear, but an encourager too. My pastor, Ray Nethery, he's an encourager. He was here at our church 2-3 weeks ago and was here just to listen, and then to listen to me preaching and teaching, and then to give me guidance, to assess me. So I had a man who's been in ministry over 60 years sitting in the congregation for the sole purpose of telling me how I did, how I can be better. And I think we need to do that. I really do. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, a lot of questions, which means we either did a really good job or a really bad job. So
Yeah,
I think it's going to be a good job. So we're going to just start going through these. We got less than 15 minutes, so we'll do rapid fire. How much connection is there between what you study to preach and what you study in your personal time with God?
Sometimes it can't be disconnected. Like there have been times studying the book of Psalms this year, and I'll make this real quick. Studying the book of Psalms this year, sometimes if I'm not in a series, like right now, I'm in a series going through Hebrews, calling it Better Things from Above, Better Covenant, Better Country, etc. But there have been times when I've broken away from even that series that I'm going through and had to preach or teach something from the book of Psalms because it moved me so much. So sometimes it can't be disconnected. Sometimes it's just where my inspiration is, and I could get up and say, the Holy Ghost told me to preach this. But I think what it may be is maybe it is from God speaking to me, but I just got such inspiration myself that it was overflowing, and I had to share that in ministry. I don't know if that answers the question.
It does, and I would also add that sometimes we build this false dichotomy in our minds, that there's study for a sermon, that there's study for personal enrichment, and that there's study that will be devotional, that brings us closer to God, when really there's a great deal of overlap
there has to be
between those. We were talking about this earlier today, that oftentimes when you look at Paul's letters, Paul opens with a greeting, he moves on to a prayer, and then he moves from the prayer into like a theological exposition of some certain topic.
Or the gospel.
The gospel, right?
Yeah.
But you don't even really know where the prayer ends and where the theology begins.
Right.
And then he'll just start praying again in the middle of this theological exposition.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just like he's in the middle of this deep truths. And and then in Romans chapter 9 through 11, he's speaking of how God will be faithful to his covenant to Israel, even though many of them appear not to believe now. And so he's trying to make sense out of all that. And then he doesn't have an answer. So he goes, well, just blessed be God forever.
Right. And then sometimes you can feel Paul getting carried away.
Right.
Absolutely getting carried away with the beauty and the wonder of the subject. that he's
So
dealing
that's
with.
study. So when you study, it leads you to wonder.
Right.
When you wonder, it leads you to worship.
Right.
When you worship, it leads you to prayer. When you pray, it leads you to study. And so maybe we need to break down some of those categories of like,
Yeah.
okay, well, right now it's my personal time where I'm just going to meditate on the scriptures
Right.
and I'm not going to use any other resources. And,
Yeah.
maybe it's all together.
Just meet with him in the cool of the day.
Right.
And walk with him and listen to him. I had a real revelation in prayer. Oh, I don't know how long ago it was, when I was just kind of laboring in prayer, and I felt the Lord speak to me and say, just talk to me. Just talk to me. And it still resonates with me. The Lord just wants us to talk with him, just walk with him in the cool of the day. And if ministry related things come out of that, it's from God. And so I think that line of demarcation that we would draw between personally devotional and ministry oriented, there's not a real clear line there.
Right. So one of the questions that are raised is like, how much commentary should someone read? And how do we find accurate commentaries? There is a website that you actually told me about
right.
that I wasn't aware of.
There's a really good website called bestcommentaries.com, and they'll break it down between technical, devotional, and pastoral. And it even rates them by number. Like we were talking about, we looked up best commentaries on the book of Acts, and Darrell Bach's commentary rated like over 90 something out of 100. So you can look at bestcommentaries.com and pick out some good commentaries. I find sometimes if I'm reading a scripture and I feel drawn to it, but I open it, I read it, and I'm stuck, I'll definitely go to a commentary. I've got some favorite commentaries. Broadman's. I like Broadman's commentary. I like Vincent's Word Studies. There's a couple others that I like. I even use sometimes the Bible Hub app, and they've got quite a few.
App.
Yeah, it's a very good app. And sometimes commentaries can get you bogged down. There have been more times than I'd like to confess that I've gotten caught up in commentaries and got too much material. And editing can be hard. I mean, this is like your baby and you're cutting it up. Editing can be very hard in sermon preparation. So you have to be careful. Find commentaries that you like, that speak to you, because all of us have voices in our life that really speak to us. And it may be different for one person than it is another person. You may be drawn to a ministry. Somebody, listening to, Landon and I were talking the other day about how much we like Tim Keller from Redeemer Presbyterian in New York City. He speaks to me.
Absolutely.
He speaks to me. There are guys that speak to other people. There are commentaries that speak to. Obviously, you can read Spurgeon if you want to study the Psalms, Treasury of David, and so forth. There's so many good ones out there. Bestcommentaries.com is a good way to find good individual commentaries.
And how much commentary do you need to read? I think you just need to read enough of it to get a grasp, if for the purpose of teaching or preaching, to really feel like you have a good handle on what the passage means, what its message was to the original readers, and what its message is to you. For a sermon prep, you may not need to go much deeper. You may not need to know the etymology of every single word or whatnot. And if you're studying a book for a year, as Pastor Rande suggested, then you might want to dig into those types of issues.
Right.
So lots of questions just basically on how you find books to read, and then maybe if you could give some suggestions on books you've read that have had the most impact on your ministry, which will be tough, but if you could think of maybe a couple theological tomes and maybe a couple of practical or ministerial tomes.
I have friends who are avid readers, and like Landon said, I'll say, what are you reading? I have two sons in ministry, full-time ministry, and there was a question there, is Pastor Rande full-time? Yes, I am. I have two sons in full-time ministry that are avid readers, and so we bounce things off each other. I have pastor friends that I'll call up and say, what are you reading? And we'll do that. Books books that have made an impact on my life, John Stott's The Cross of Christ is a classic. And Greg Boyd wrote Satan and the Problem of Evil, which was the second in a series of, first one was God at War, and it's about spiritual warfare, and then Satan and the Problem of Evil, answering the question, if God is good, and if he's powerful, why doesn't he stop evil? Satan and the Problem of Evil, a tremendous book that I've read twice and really made an impact on me. I'm thinking right now I've been reading a book called Life in the Spirit by an author, Arthur Skevington Wood, that really is speaking to me. It's an exposition of Romans chapter 8. And I bought it in a used bookstore for $1.50, I think. E. Stanley Jones has really spoken into my life. Eugene Peterson, anything, his books on pastoral ministry, Under the Unpredictable Plant, The Contemplative Pastor. Eugene Peterson is great. I love the way he frames things and says things. His book, The Pastor, it's autobiographical. Anybody in ministry, full-time or not full-time ministry, should read The Pastor by Eugene Peterson. It's a tremendous book. It really is. It will inspire you. It will relieve you of some pressures, because Peterson is just a gracious guy, even in his writing. You feel the grace. That's just.
Why don't we do this? Would you be willing, and you have to say yes because you're on camera now, over the next week or so, maybe to compile us a list
Sure.
of a handful of theological type books and maybe a handful of pastoral books that you found most helpful? I think that would really be.
Remind me to do that.
Yes, sir, I will.
Okay.
I think that would be a great help for our students. So just moving through a lot of these, we've addressed a lot of this. As far as one question is how to balance being a student of the Word along with preparing your heart for everyday life at work, school, family. It's probably best just not to view those as separate things, that your study time is also your devotional time, and that it merges together so beautifully that maybe that's not necessary. As far as being a bivocational pastor, that's something that you've experienced.
Right. I worked in a print shop for 9 years, 8 years while I pastored elsewhere, and then 1 year while I pastored here, and that was 1992. So I've been full time since 1993, and I'm at the same church. I've pastored 2 separate churches. So yeah, I am full time now, but 9 years of my pastoral ministry were bivocational.
Right, and you have to go with whatever life gives you, and so you can't beat yourself up that you're not as well read as that person if you don't have as much time or whatever it might be. But the thing is that almost all of us have time, whether we're bivocational pastors, whether we're full-time moms, whether we're whatever's going on. We have, there is a window of time, and it's about redeeming that time that you have,
right,
whatever that time looks
right.
like. And someone asked a question about wanting to be more of a morning person and study earlier.
Right.
A couple of practical tips. You can always wake up a little bit earlier each day. So if your wake up call right now is 7 and you'd like to get up earlier to study, I don't recommend setting it for 5 o'clock tomorrow because that's a big jump.
Yeah.
But if you keep backing it up 10 or 15 minutes, just allowing yourself time. Something else that really helps with morning study, in my opinion, is to have a very clear goal of what you're going to do. So are you going to wake up and you're going to read Psalms? Are you going to read that new book from the list that Pastor Rande gives you? To know what you're going to do, because there's some such thing called decision fatigue. And whenever you're sleepy in the morning, if you wake up and you're unclear on what you want to do, like I may read this, I may read that. Right. It's so hard to roll out of bed and make that decision. So you have a plan, you have something like, here's what I'm going to do tomorrow.
You shouldn't make important decisions when you're tired anyway.
Right.
I've done that in my life and regretted it.
That's true. And that's so actually the topic of decision fatigue is relevant to another issue. There's a discussion about whether morning's the best time.
Yeah.
There's probably no best time. The best time is whatever time you have, and your family life and your work life is going to dictate that. But why morning is my preferred time, and why, if there is a best time, I can make a strong case for it being morning time, is that idea of decision fatigue. That throughout the day, even if you've not had a stressful day, you've still had to decide what you're going to wear and what you're going to eat and which route you're going to take to work. And just by the end of the day, you've made so many decisions. Your brain has been involved in so many different things that it doesn't matter how disciplined or even how brilliant you are.
Right.
You can only do so much.
There's one more thing I wanted to say about lifelong learning, and that is, for anybody in ministry, you're going to have hurts. There are going to be disappointments. There's going to be reversals and setbacks. There's going to be things that you face in ministry that just wound you. And there's no way to get around it, because you're dealing with people that sometimes make mistakes and do things that they shouldn't do. There are going to be people that are going to leave your ministry and walk away. One of the things that I have learned that's helped me, because every pastor has it, every church has it, I don't care who they are. If you're in ministry for any appreciable time, you're going to have setbacks, disappointments, reversals. When that happens, I just really dive into study to help me get reoriented, because I'm the kind of person that when I have a reversal or a setback, I could stew. Right. I could sit and stew about that, and I could mourn the loss of a brother or sister and spend days mourning. But over time, I've been able to say, I can't mourn, I can't change it. There's nothing I can do to change it right now. They've made up their mind. So what I'm going to do is pour myself into really getting something that is meaningful, that will help me. I read a book. I had a ministry reversal a while back. I found a book called Well-Intentioned Dragons, How to Deal with Problem People. And I read it, and it really helped me. Well-Intentioned Dragons. I don't remember the author's name, but it helped me to deal with that particular ministerial setback at that time. Pour yourself into it. Don't let it keep you from it. Let it drive you to it, is when you have disappointments and reversals.
Wonderful. I think those are the questions. Oh, one last easy question. How do you pick the book of the Bible that you're going to take the year on?
Gosh. Well, if I find I chose to do Psalms this year because I came across Tim and Kathy Keller's devotional through Psalms, the Songs of Jesus. And so I thought, well, that'll be a perfect breakdown. I'll read that, what they have in that daily devotional part that day, and then I'll dive in and study. I have books that are favorites. I'm a big fan of Colossians. This great cosmic Christ. Ephesians, it's about a little bit more about ecclesiology, and about the church of Jesus Christ. And I chose the book of Revelation one time, which is not my wheelhouse. And then I got really messed up in my eschatology. So you just pray and try to feel after the Lord as to where the Lord would take you. I know that's a little vague to say that. Maybe just open your Bible and wherever it falls to. I don't know.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is to mix it up a little bit, because we all have our favorites. And so most of us are more comfortable in the New Testament. So be sure to alternate some Old Testament books in as you can. So rave reviews tonight. Everyone likes you. So we're going to have you come back. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Landon. It's been a joy to be with you.
And it's been fantastic. I've enjoyed it. And now you've got a sneak peek into what our week's been. We just sit around and talk about these things all the time. our wives are, they go have tea,
shopping.
they go shopping.
That's right. That's right.
They've had enough of it. But anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you are watching this recorded, please write a 1-page paper, double-spaced, normal font, size 12, Times New Roman, all that stuff. And I will put a drop box in each of your classrooms so you can submit that as well. Thank you for your time. Keep up the good work and let us know how we can help you. Bye-bye.